All right, good evening. It is great to see all of you here tonight. And I mentioned last week that we would be covering Revelation 12 and 13. Didn't realize that in the schedule that had been mapped out to get us through the rest of the book, it was going to demand 3 chapters tonight. So I think we can do that. We can get through 12, 13, and 14. And once again, the images shift into something extremely dramatic, something we haven't seen before. We've seen women, we've seen babies, we've never seen a dragon, but even this woman that is described at the beginning of Revelation 12, we've never seen anything like this before. So we're going to dive right into the text as we've done before. We'll read each section of text and then come back and comment on it. So beginning in verse 1 of Revelation 12, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven. And you would hope that these two signs, these two images, are a long way from one another, but they are not. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon, with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its head. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days, 42 months, 3.5 years, a time, times, and half a time, just like we've seen before, and just like we'll see again, even before we get out of the study tonight. So what's going on? First of all, this word sign that John uses is a word that John likes to use. He uses it 7 times in his gospel when he records 7 signs that Jesus performed. The first of those was at the wedding feast of Cana, and he makes it clear this was his first sign. And it's not just a miracle and a wonder, it's something that points to something else. So this is a word that John is used to using. This is an incredibly glorious image of this woman clothed with the sun, the moon as a footstool for her feet. So who is this woman? I think she is Israel, God's covenant people, because who is it that brings this child? As we'll see, I don't think there's any question as to who this child is. This child is the Messiah who is being born. And when you look at how Israel was honored as God's covenant people, glorified as God's chosen people, that is fitting for the moon and the sun and the moon. Israel is figuratively described as God's wife, God's bride in Isaiah 54 and other places. That's why his people's unfaithfulness to him was likened to adultery. The crown with 12 stars in it, that corresponds precisely with the 12 tribes, the 12 patriarchs, and it is obviously through Israel that the Christ was going to come. He was the seed of woman. He was the descendant of Abraham. He was the root and the descendant of David. And if you look at passages in Isaiah and Micah, Israel is described as being pregnant with messianic hope. Isaiah 9 tells us that a child is going to be born, a son is going to be given to us. And so it just makes all kinds of sense that at least at this point in the figure, the woman is physical Israel, the nation of Israel, the descendants of Abraham. The dragon, he's got 7 heads and 10 horns, and these crowns that are on the dragon, this is the first time we've encountered diadems in the New Testament. Everywhere else that we've read about crowns in the New Testament, the Greek word is stephanos, the victor's crown, the athlete's crown, the laurel wreath. That's the crown of life that will be given to those who persevere. But only 3 times in Revelation, 3 times in the whole New Testament does this term diadem appear. And so it's used in regard to the dragon in chapter 12, the beast in chapter 13, and in regard to Christ in chapter 19. And in this display of power, he sweeps away a third of the stars with his tail, throws them to the earth, and he is poised to devour this child as soon as the woman gives birth. This is a terrifying image, a terrifying picture. There's no doubt as to who the dragon is. We're told precisely in verse 9 of this chapter that the dragon is the ancient serpent, and the word for serpent is different from dragon. And I'll refrain from going down a little sidebar discussion there for the moment, but the ancient serpent that is called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He's the deceiver. He is the father of lies, who's been a liar from the beginning. The color red just seems to be related to the color of blood, and he is the one who is behind the martyrdom of all of God's people. In John chapter 8, verse 44, Jesus said of Satan, he's been a murderer from the beginning. And the description of his heads and his horns and his tail is just a description of power, and that indeed he is a force to be reckoned with, and we need to be sober, we need to be vigilant, and we'll look at some of those texts a little later. But the dragon is seen flexing his muscle, you know, that he could gather a third of the stars and cast them down to the earth. The crowns relate to his rule and his influence upon the earth. He's got no authority in heaven, but upon the earth he is a formidable foe. And Paul calls him in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 2, the prince of the power of the air. Jesus referred to Satan as the ruler of this world. Ultimately, God is sovereign. God is in control. But until the consummation, until justice is done and righteousness is fulfilled, his authority on the earth will continue. And this image of a dragon, you know, you read Matthew 1 and 2 and Luke 1 and 2, and the birth narrative of Jesus in the Gospels doesn't read quite like this, but this is spiritually what's going on. We think of Herod the Great being the one who hears about the King of the Jews being born and wanting to kill the child, devour the child unsuccessfully, but Satan's the one who's really behind that. And those efforts, I think, continue from Satan through the 40 days in the wilderness. If he can find a chink in the armor, if he can bring about just one failure, then there is no spotless Lamb of God. There is no unblemished sacrifice that can be offered. The plots that develop throughout, and it doesn't take long for plots to begin among the religious leaders to put Jesus to death. His hour has not yet come at those times. It's not going to happen until God says it's going to happen. But the dragon constantly tries to undo what God is trying to accomplish, probably thinks he has fulfilled that mission at the crucifixion. So the male child is born, no doubt that that's Jesus Christ, but notice in the sign, in the vision, he's immediately caught up to God and to his throne, not to protect him from the dragon, but so that he might begin his reign, begin his rule with this iron scepter. That's from Psalm 2, verse 9, which is a royal psalm. Psalm 2 is the psalm from which we get that quotation, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." Other admonition in that psalm, kiss the Son, do obeisance to him, bow before him, because he is going to be the ruler. But interestingly, in this vision, there's nothing between the birth of the child and his being caught up to heaven. Well, that's okay. John wrote another book about that, about everything that happens between his birth and his ascension. That's what we know as the Gospel of John. The woman flees into the wilderness where there is a lot of biblical significance. She is cared for and protected for, again, 1,260 days, which by the Hebrew calculation of 30 days per month is 42 months, which is 3.5 years, which is a time times and half a time, which we encountered in Daniel and we will encounter at least twice in Revelation. Again, that's the same length of time that God's holy city is trampled by the nations in the previous chapter, chapter 11. Same length of time that the two witnesses prophesied. So we're starting to get this feel that a time times and half a time, 42 months, 1,260 days, 3.5 years, is the time of the work of God's church upon the earth when Satan is trying to undo everything that God is trying to do. This time between the first and second comings of Jesus. But at this point, who is the woman? And I love how in so many biblical texts, not only this one, when God chooses a symbol, he can do whatever he wants to with it. And these symbols have elasticity. And so the woman who previously was physical Israel, I think now becomes spiritual Israel, the church, God's covenant people in Christ, which includes both Jews and Gentiles. These passages from Romans and Galatians make it clear that Abraham's real descendants, the heirs of Abraham, are really those who have Abraham's faith, whether they are Jews or Gentiles. And the church is referred to as God's Israel. And so the dragon's not, at this point in history, the dragon's not going to have any interest in persecuting the Jewish people or the Jewish system of faith. They've rejected Jesus. They are right where he wants them. He is after the followers of Christ. And so a little later in this chapter, we're going to read that the woman's children are those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. Well, whose kids are that? That's the church's kids. And the church is the bride of Christ. And Christians are the children of that union. So the woman remains God's covenant people, but she starts out as physical Israel and then is viewed as God's spiritual Israel. Then we're told about this war that's going on in heaven, the unseen struggle that parallels the struggle that's going on earth. So picking up at verse 7, then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, same dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But the dragon wasn't strong enough. They lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth and his angels with him. When you have a wounded animal, you often get a very aggressive animal, and one whose days are numbered, and we're going to see the same thing with the dragon. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, now have come, with the defeat of the dragon, now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah. That's the child that had been born and that had ascended to God. For the accuser, who's that? That's the dragon. The accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down. They triumphed over him, over the dragon. Why? Because we're so strong? We're so powerful? No. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. Because our testimony is so great? No, because of the one of whom we testify and bear witness. They didn't love their lives so much as to shrink from death. There's an acknowledgement people's faithfulness to the Lamb is costing them their lives. Therefore, rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them, but woe to the earth and the sea. Why? Because the devil, the dragon, has gone down to you. He is filled with fury because he knows that his time is short. You've got a powerful wounded short timer in the dragon. And he's wanting to cause as much damage, do as much harm as he can in the time that he has left. So when the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he's still pursuing the woman who had given birth to the male child. She was given the 2 wings of a great eagle so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness, where she would be taken care of for how long? A time, times, and half a time. 1 time, 2 times, and a half a time, 3.5 times, 42 months, 3.5 years, 1,260 days. But she's protected during that time from the serpent's reach. But he won't give up. She's being protected, but he pulls out all the stops. Then from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river to overtake the woman and sweep her away with the torrent. God's going to use all creation to protect his people. The earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring. Who are her kids? We are her kids. You know, God's church, God's people are the children of this woman that the dragon is seeking to devour. And that's what 2 Timothy 3:15 says. Be sober, be vigilant. He's trying to devour us like a roaring lion, like a dragon, whatever image you want to choose. So Satan knows that he is a short timer, that his end has been assured, and enraged at his defeat, he continues to persecute the church. So Jesus said in John 16:33, in the world you have tribulation. Acts 14:22, Paul says, through many tribulations we must enter the kingdom of God. 2 Timothy 3:12, all those who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. Why? Because there is a powerful, wounded, short-timer dragon out there who, even though his defeat is certain, he wants to take as many with him as possible. But God cares for, sustains, and preserves his church. Wings of an eagle, that eagle imagery is used repeatedly in the Old Testament. The wilderness is where Moses was spared for 40 years when he fled Egypt, and then for 40 more years when he led the Israelites in the wilderness. Elijah is sustained in the wilderness. Jesus is sustained in the wilderness, ministered to by angels during those 40 days. So God protects the woman from whatever Satan can spew out of his mouth. From Homer Haley, now the serpent has tried to sweep away the woman by a river that is issued out of his mouth. As we'll continue to read, delusions come in the form of lies, false impressions of invincible power, false religious teachings, false philosophies, false charges, and malicious reports intended to destroy the church. To these he would add the seductive temptations of lust. Let the saint remember that everything the devil says and does is a lie. Remember how he's been sent out to deceive the world? Whenever he speaks a lie, Jesus said he speaks from his own nature, for he is a liar and the father of lies. So that was the quote of the week, and then I had more quotes of the week, and there's not just one bonus quote of the week. So this is the first bonus quote of the week. More to come. At the same time, those joining in the victory song foresee horrors ahead for the saints on earth. They know that a defeated and frustrated Satan will turn his full fury on them. There will be many more martyrs now, for Satan sees that his only remaining hope, having failed to destroy the Christ, is to turn on those who follow him, to torment and hurt them. Thus there will be an intensification of persecution for the people of God on earth. Second bonus quote of the week. The troubles of the persecuted righteous arise not because Satan is too strong, but because he is beaten. He is doing all the harm he can while he can, but he will not be able to do this for much longer. But we keep asking for how much longer. And that's what they were asking in Revelation chapter 5. Those souls under the altar, how long, O Lord, are you going to let this go on? The questions are still being asked because of the ongoing spiritual warfare. 1 Peter 5:8, not 2 Peter 3:15, which is an entirely another text that I mentioned a moment ago. Satan, our adversary, still prowls around, so we need to be sober, we need to be vigilant. He can be successfully resisted, according to James 4:7, not because he fears us in any shape, form, or fashion, but because of his fear of the one who is in us. John writes in 1 John 4, greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. The dragon is the one who is in the world. Our spiritual armor that is described in Ephesians 6 is given to us precisely for our defense against him. And it is the full armor of God. It's not our armor. It's his. And it's in his strength that we are called upon to stand. And that's chapter 12. A woman, a child, and a dragon. And, you know, in a few more weeks, when we begin to read more frequently, Matthew 1 and 2 and Luke 1 and 2, keep Revelation 12 in mind. That lets us know what's going on in the spiritual realm when all of these events begin to take place. Herod is a puppet of the dragon who's trying to put the child to death. Same dragon now is seen on the shore of the sea. And in the ancient Near East, and including among biblical writers in the Old Testament, prophets in the Old Testament, the sea is envisioned as the source of chaos and the source of evil. So as we'll see from Daniel chapter 12, all these beasties and critters that come up. They come up out of the sea. That's where they emerge from. So, sorry about that. Go back a little more. The dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. Not the dragon, a beast. It had 10 horns and 7 heads with 10 crowns on its horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. Something just profane and vile. Anything that you can imagine that dishonors God and denies his existence and his power, or casts aspersion upon the reign of his son. Those kinds of things are written on each of these heads. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear. And the dad joke in me says that this is a barefooted leopard. So we've got a barefooted leopard with a mouth like a lion that roars, a lion that's powerful. Where does the beast get his power? He gets his power from the dragon and his throne and his great authority. So the dragon is the spiritual force that's behind this beast that comes up out of the sea onto the earth. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed, and the world's going to be amazed at that. The world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. And because they followed the beast, in reality, they're worshiping the dragon. People worship the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshiped the beast and said, who's like the beast? Who can wage war against it? The beast must be the most powerful thing in the universe. There can be no power greater than the beast. That's the mindset of the people on the earth. The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise its authority for 42 months. Seems like we've been there before. Seems like we're talking about the same period of time over and over and over again. And when you want to make a point, you make it over and over and over again. Same period of time is in mind for all of these things. Exercised its authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God, to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. It was given power to wage war. Where does he get his power? The dragon gives the beast power to wage war against God's holy people, against us, and to conquer them. It was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All over the world, this has the potential to go on. So all the inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast. All whose names, so that's them, that's not us. Who's us? We're those whose names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life, for whom the Lamb was slain, for the creation of the world. Whoever has ears, let them hear. If anyone is to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. So we've got this dragon, this woman, this child. We've got this blasphemous beast. And then we get something just as plain as day, written in just regular old language that reminds us of what this message is all about. What's the lesson in there for us? Patience. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. There's nobody that can't understand that, And so we're given reminders throughout the book that despite all this apocalyptic imagery and dragons and beasts and women and children and crowns and horns and tails, this is a reminder to us as God's people about the patient endurance that is required of us as we live this life and the faithfulness that's required. John sees the dragon standing on the seashore. We know the dragon from the previous chapters, same one. There are similarities now between the dragon and the beast that comes up out of the sea. 7 heads, 10 horns. The crowns are on the horns rather than on the heads, as was the case with the dragon. And we have a composite beast. Kind of like a leopard, kind of like a bear, kind of like a lion, and that's not a surprise because Old Testament prophets used the same kind of images. So if you go back and you read Daniel chapter 7, Daniel sees not just one empire, not just 4 kingdoms. He sees 4 kingdoms coming up out of where? Out of the sea, where evil comes from, where chaos comes from. He foresees Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and now this current kingdom that John is addressing, Rome. But they're all described in similar language. a lion with eagle's wings, a bear, a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads. And then Rome, he says, there's no animal I've ever seen that I can even compare that one to. Just iron teeth, 10 horns. So it was well established in Jewish apocalyptic literature that nations are described in terms of beasts. And so who should we think this beast is? A kingdom? Who's in charge when this is being written? Rome. And so that's where everything is pointing to. The beast's power, throne, and authority were supplied by the dragon. The beast is imperial Rome. The beast is the Roman Empire. And again, if you disagree with that, we'll still share the Lord's Supper on Sunday. We'll still spend eternity together in heaven. But I think that makes the most sense within its historical context. There is this Nero Redivivus, or Redivivus myth. Nero commits suicide in AD 68. But very few people saw his body. They just heard the report that Nero had taken his own life. It's sort of like Adolf Hitler dies. There are a lot of people that denied he was dead. And there were all kinds of theories and conspiracy theories about him living in Argentina, and he's raising an army, and he's going to make another run at world domination. It's Hitler all over again. It's Nero all over again. And so there's this myth that this seems to be referring to. One of these heads, had this fatal wound, but the fatal wound was healed. But by worshiping the beast, in reality, they're worshiping Satan. They're worshiping the dragon. The beast speaks arrogant words and blasphemies. Early on, the emperors would be venerated after they died. They had ascended to godhood. And then that just becomes old and tired. Living emperors were beginning to be worshipped. Domitian in particular, worshipped as divine. And he's making war against God's people for this period of time, 1,260 days, 42 months, 3.5 years, a time times and half a time. Same length that all of these other things have been described as going on. So this beast that comes out up from the sea is worshipped by, remember the Revelation code for not God's people? Those who dwell on the earth. We dwell on the earth with them, but we are not of the earth like they are of the earth. And so, and those are the same people whose names aren't in the Lamb's book of life. And we know that our names are there. So the beast would wield captivity, would wield the sword. So this is going to demand faith and perseverance from God's people in order to be able to withstand this beast. And things would be bad enough if there was just a dragon and a beast, but there's another beast that serves the first beast and ultimately serves the dragon. I saw a second beast. Where did the first beast come from? From the sea. This one comes from the earth. This one comes from the land. And, lambs are cute. I guess even a lamb with 2 horns would be cute compared to a dragon in the appearance of this beast. But this beast speaks like a dragon because it serves the dragon. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf. Second beast serves the first beast and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, worship Rome and the Roman Empire and the emperor whose fatal wound had been healed. And it performed great signs. Jesus predicted that there would be all kinds of false signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. Because of these signs, it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast. It deceived the inhabitants of the earth. Why do so many people follow the road that they follow? Why do so many people, ultimately, their allegiance, there's just 2 roads. You're either on the narrow one or the broad one. You're either serving God or Satan. Why do so many people unwittingly follow the dragon? It's because of deceit. He doesn't look like a dragon when you see him in the world. If he looked like a dragon, if he looked like this, who would follow him? But that's not how he presents himself in the world. So because of the signs, people follow the first beast. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast. Rome and its emperor, who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. So, the old line in the Old Testament prophets was, these idols, they can't speak, they can't hear, they can't walk, so no need to be afraid of them. The deception makes people think that this is a true God who can speak, who does have power, whom you should fear. And if you don't serve this beast, then you'll die. It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. So this is where you go to the agora, you go to the marketplace, and you need to buy bread. But before you can buy bread, you have to produce proof that you have worshiped the emperor. And there is documentation that exists for that. So this calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and that number is 666. So pop some popcorn, let the lights go down, let the curtain come back on the screen, and let's watch that terrifying movie, because this has fascinated so many people, and they've got it so wrong. And what's in Scripture isn't nearly as fantastical as that. From a biblical standpoint, it's much more boring than that. But that's not the Bible's fault, that it doesn't live up to all these imaginative creations of men's minds. So what does that mean? So, as if that weren't enough, there's this other beast, 2 horns like a lamb. I think the lamb involves sacrifice to the emperor, spoke like a dragon, who is Satan. His work is to cause those who dwell on the earth to worship the first beast, and he deceives those who dwell on the earth with wonders and signs. I think the second beast is the imperial cult, emperor worship. Notice how the second beast causes people to worship the first beast. If the first beast is Rome and its emperor, how do you get people to worship the emperor and think that Rome is eternal and that Rome is the greatest power in the cosmos? Well, you need some system to do that. Its purpose is to promote and ensure worship of the beast. Jesus and his apostles had warned about false wonders and signs. So this second beast, later in Revelation, is going to be referred to as the false prophet. So we've got Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We've got dragon, beast, and little beast. We've got dragon, beast, and false prophet. This unholy trinity who are opposing the Holy Trinity. So the beast would limit commerce and daily life to those who had demonstrated allegiance to the first beast and who were marked in their right hand or their forehead with the name of the beast or his number. Not literally, they're not literally tattooed. They are given identification, documentation that they had been to the temple. They had visited the cultic temple of the imperial cult, and they had offered sacrifice. They had said, Caesar is Lord. And when you do that, you are given documentation that says you're a citizen in good standing of this empire. You can buy and sell, own property, do whatever you want to do. If you don't do that, consequences will be different. So just as the Lord knew those were his by sealing them in their foreheads, not literally, but symbolically through the Holy Spirit, the beast knows who are his as well. So the number of the beast is man's number, some translations say, or the number of a man. This is the first beast, and that number is 666. When you have time, or you can do it right now if you want to, you can suit yourself. Go to Wikipedia or just Google gematria. It's not something that biblical commentators made up just to make sense of Revelation. It's been a real deal for a long time. Back in the day, like way back in the day, they didn't use Arabic numerals like we do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 144, all these other numbers. Letters of the alphabet had numeric value. So I don't know why I'd never thought of this before, so I went to my Greek interlinear of Revelation just to look at what the text looked like when it says 144,000? Well, there is a Greek word for thousand, like there's a Greek word for 10, deca, and there's a Greek word for 7, hepta. But the 144 part that is before the 1,000 is 3 Greek letters, the total numeric value of which is 144. So everybody knows about Vesuvius and Pompeii and all of the discoveries that have been made at Pompeii. They found this little piece of graffiti on one of the walls there in Pompeii. I love the girl whose number is 545. I love the girl whose number is 545. And it's just 3 Latin letters there in Pompeii. But some have suggested that 666, this man's number, or the number of a man, is Nero Caesar. But to get to Nero Caesar, you've got to vary the spelling and transliterate it into Hebrew and take the Hebrew numeric values rather than the Greek ones, and it's just a little far-fetched. So he has, this beast, this man whose number is 666, has been anybody and everybody you could ever imagine down through history. Domitian, countless popes. For those who see the beast as papal Rome all through the Middle Ages, there's an endless line of popes who people have said was the beast. Adolf Hitler, would you believe that Ronald Wilson Reagan, there are 6 letters in each of those names. And do you think anybody missed the opportunity to say, oh man, this must be it? And there's no end to it, but it's not one person. Interestingly, the name Jesus, the Greek letters that form the name Jesus, and if you're looking at these letters, notice the third one is 200 and the last one is 200. Those are both sigmas. It's the same letter. It's just like when you write the letter sigma differently when it's the last letter in a word than you do when it's in the middle of a word. So if you're thinking, hey, how can 2 different letters equal 200? It's the same letter, just written differently based on where it is in the word. But if you add up the letters, the numeric value of the letters in the Greek name Iesus, it's 888. And in the early centuries of the church, writers didn't miss that. And so 8 becomes the number of Jesus. It's on the 8th day of the week that he is raised. The 8th day is the first day of the week. Remember when Thomas shows up 8 days later, a literal translation is, which means a week later, the next first day of the week. So anyway, and with 7 being the number of perfection, 777 would be God's number. Man's number, the number of man, is 666. Man's imperfections in its fullness, or evil in its fullness, again, that sounds comparatively boring when compared to the fanciful, imaginative interpretations of modern times, but that's not Scripture's fault. So, for this to be man's number, and notice how it falls short. How close is 6 to 7? As close as you can get. It's almost there, but it falls short. Desperately short. This would be meaningful to people in the late 1st century. It's meaningful now. And the dragon and his allies, the beast and the false prophet, didn't go out of business when Rome fell. So its relevance is ongoing, not tied to a singular historical figure who is the beast. It is any manifestation of any kingdom that opposes God. So this is all going on earth. The dragon is the spiritual force behind it. The first beast and the second beast are turning people toward the dragon, persecuting God's people. So how is heaven affected by this? Is the lamb quaking in his boots? Is God worried about how this might be resolved? Thankfully, we get this vision back into heaven. And when things get really intense and it seems like things are as dark as they could ever be, we're reminded over and over again in this book of the true reality, the true spiritual reality. So in the midst of all this conflagration and dragons and beasts, I looked and there was the Lamb standing on Mount Zion. And with him were 10,000 of the 144,000 that had made it, or 75,000 of the 144,000 who had made it? No, all of them. 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. I heard a sound from heaven like the roar of rushing waters and like a loud peal of thunder. The sound I heard was like that of harpists playing their harps. That's a beautiful sound. And they sang a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders that we met at the beginning of the book. No one could, this is our song. And those who dwell on the earth don't know this song. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. They are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they remained virgins. They followed the Lamb wherever he goes. Remember when we first encountered the 144,000, we mentioned some religious groups who want to say that's a real number, and only 144,000 are actually going to make it in heaven. The rest of us, we're not going to be slumming it, but we'll still have physical bodies forever on the earth, but we won't make it to heaven. If you take the 144,000 literally, then you have to take 12,000 from those 12 tribes literally, and they're all men and they're all virgins. And so it's 144,000 Jewish male virgins. And I think that counts out everybody in this room. And most of the people we know, most of the people we'll ever know. So, if you're going to take part of it literally, you got to take all of it literally. We take all of it figuratively, symbolically, as I think we're meant to. They were purchased from among mankind and offered as first fruits to God and to the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouths. They are blameless. So these are 144,000 perfect people. No, the Lamb had to be slain. Why did he have to be slain? Because those people weren't perfect. He was slain so that their sins might be forgiven, and they were redeemed from the earth by God and the Lamb. So, the dragon's doing as much damage on earth as he can do. The Lamb still stands on Mount Zion. The war against the saints by the unholy Trinity doesn't change their spiritual security or their destiny. If we want him to take us, he'll take us. But if we don't, he can't touch us. These 144,000 who have been purchased from the earth and sealed on their foreheads sing a new song before the throne of God and the four living creatures and the elders. So now we get these angelic, so God's people are secure, they are safe, and then we get these angelic messages. Then I saw another angel flying in midair. He had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth. Who's that for? As for every nation and tribe and language and people, he said in a loud voice, fear God and give him glory. So this, boiling it down, fear God, because Babylon's days are numbered. Rome's days are numbered. Don't put your hope there. Don't put your trust there. Don't put your future there. Fear God and give him glory, not Caesar, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, and the sea, and the springs of water. Why? Because of what the second angel says, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. Just like Babylon fell, Rome would fall. Just like Greece fell, Rome would fall. Just like the Medes and the Persians fell, Rome would fall. Which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries. Now the third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and its image and receives its mark on their forehead or on their hand, they too will drink the wine of God's fury that's been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. That's a terrifying image. You've got this bottle of wine that says God's fury. That's the name of the wine. And it's poured into the cup of God's wrath. You don't want that poured out on you. They will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb. The smoke of their torment will rise forever and ever. And we're going to be promised rest. For these there is no rest, day or night, for those who worship the beast and its image, or for anyone who receives the mark of its name. This calls, here's the plain and simple, once again, this calls for patient endurance on the part of the people of God, those people who are interested in keeping his commands and want to remain faithful to Jesus. Then I heard a voice from heaven say, remember at the beginning we said there's 7 Beatitudes in Revelation. This is the second. Blessed are those blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow them. You see the end for those who follow the dragon. You see the end for those who remain faithful to the Lamb. So they're called to worship God because Babylon is a goner. Those who worship the beast, receive his mark, and drink of Babylon's wine of the passion of her immorality will drink of the cup of God's undiluted wrath. Again, a terrifying description of their punishment and their suffering. These pronouncements of judgment stand in sharp contrast to the perseverance of the saints who have kept God's commands and their faith in Jesus, and thus this beautiful beatitude in Revelation 14:13. Even when they were killed by the beast, they were victorious. So, I'm not going to read the third bonus quote of the week just so that we can read the rest of the text. And this will complete chapter 14, and then we'll be finished for tonight. I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like a son of man, with a crown of gold on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. Now we've got a more, I've never seen a dragon. I've seen people harvest a crop. Then another angel came out of the temple and called in a loud voice to him who was sitting on the cloud, "Take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe." So he who was seated on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Still another angel who had charge of the fire came from the altar and called in a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, "Take your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of grapes from the earth's vine, because its grapes are ripe." The angel swung his sickle on the earth, gathered its grapes, threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath, and they were trampled in the winepress outside the city. The blood flowed out of the press, rising as high as horses' bridles for a distance of 1,600 stadia. And it's this, again, conflated image of grapes being harvested, but what comes out of the wine press isn't wine, it's blood. This is judgment. Again, trying to make this work physically, 1,600 stadia is about 200 miles. As deep as horses' bridles for 200 miles. All of this is saying is this is complete, full judgment that is being meted out. So from the battle hymn of the Republic, he is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. And just the phrase, the grapes of wrath, that's where that comes from. But that's upon those who dwell upon the earth, not upon those who are faithful to the Lamb. They are blessed because they rest and they wait. And that is what God has in store for us. So we'll pick up with chapter 15. I think we're doing 15, 16, and 17 maybe next week. But that's all for tonight. Thank you for your kind attention, and hope you have a great rest of the week.